Aloha family, I want to announce a brand new partnership with One Shot Voice Drops. They have these soothing yuzu voice drops that are infused with slippery elm, marshmallow, and licorice root. Great for public speakers, podcasters, gamers, streamers. Low sugar, organic ingredients like slippery elm bark, marshmallow, licorice root. Also antioxidant boosts as well as prebiotic fibers. Go to oneshotenergy.com, use my promo code AMBGLO, and you get 10% off your entire order. That's One Shot Voice Drops, the best way to take care of your voice. oneshotenergy.com. Our new merch is up. We have the Ezekiel 37 t-shirts for the guys and for the ladies. Also, our Kulia Ikonu'u, which is Hawaiian for Strive for the Highest. Aloha Volume 8 t-shirts are still up, as well as our ladies' Sweet Aloha t-shirts. For those of you that are trying to squeeze out the last couple of weeks of summer, we have our pickleball paddles and the limited edition of the A'ole Maka'u, which is Hawaiian for No Fear. If you go to therealgilo.com, click on merchandise, it'll take you to our store. And we just want to thank you again for your support. As we always say in Hawaii, mahalo nui loa. Aloha family, thank you for joining us. This is going to be a solo episode or solo podcast. And I'm excited because this is going to be kind of a different one. I haven't done one like this. I don't think I've done one like this. I think this will be the first time. I'm going to be doing it's going to be a few stories, but it's going to be a tribute of sorts as well. And I'm going to share some stories about a very good friend of ours who we had the honor and privilege of meeting and befriending, and he became such a special part of our life. And it wasn't a very long part. And it was a very brief moment in our lifetime that we met this individual, and he just passed away recently. And I just felt led. I really wanted to get a chance to sit down with him and do this organically in person, but I didn't get that opportunity. And, but I did get a chance to speak with his wife, and we talked story for a little bit. And, for those of you that follow me on social media, you may have seen some of the stories I've posted about this gentleman. And today's podcast, the title is The Heart of a Hitman. And I'm going to read something that I wrote on Twitter, on X, and then we'll get started. But let me read this. And the title for today is The Heart of a Hitman. And I know it sounds kind of like maybe I'm bait and switching, but I'm going to explain that title. And so we're going to talk about Uncle Jeff. And this is what I wrote. Meet Uncle Jeff, Jeffrey Biggie Kealoha. June 6, 1953 to February 24, 2024. A former hitman for one of Hawaii's most notorious businessmen attached to Henry Huihui, Uncle Jeff spent 43 years of his life in prison, paying for the things he did as a quote-unquote enforcer. The truth is, he paid for it his entire life. One of his most famous sayings is that he said, and he would always shout, whenever Uncle Jeff would talk, he would say, "Greg, I was never known to be a rat, and I never ratted out on my peeps." He always said peeps. It wasn't people. It wasn't friends. He always said my peeps. And even though his ledger contained a lot of red, when Uncle Jeff came out of prison, he truly showed us all the love and aloha that his name represents, which means beloved. So Kealoha in Hawaiian, in Olelo Hawaii, it literally means beloved. And it's such a unique connection. And I'll go deep into that as we go on. But Uncle Jeff was a man that was loyal beyond measure. Even in his old age, he always imposed his will upon us. And it was always out of love and wanting things done the best way possible. Ladies and gentlemen, today's podcast, we're going to talk about Uncle Jeff. Uncle Jeffrey, Biggie Kealoha. We'll be back in 43 seconds.
Woke up every day like this. It's a brand new day. Hey. Wake up every morning and say it's a brand new day. Hey. Take a good day, make it great, okay? 'Cause if you got some lemons, make some lemonade. Yeah, chase those clouds away. It's a brand new day. Hey. It's a brand new day. It's a brand new day. Okay.
So for those that are they're like, well, what kind of title is that? The Heart of a Hitman. Well, Uncle Jeff was a hitman. And we're not going to we're not going to glorify his past in the sense of what he did, but for those of you that are familiar with the syndicate in Hawaii, there's a very unique book, and I posted it on my Twitter in relation to this. And the name of the book is Sunny Skies, Shady Characters. It's a book kind of based on the dark underbelly of Hawaii, the past. So for those of you that have watched Hawaii Five-0, the old school, and even the Magnum PI, a lot of those stories were based on what really happened. Now, of course, it's Hollywood, and they kind of, glamored it up a little bit, but there was a lot of crime, a lot of gangster stuff going on back in the 60s and 70s, and Uncle Jeff was one of those guys. He was a product of some of those things, and I'm going to share a little bit of backstory. But before we get into the backstory, I'll share with you guys how I met Uncle Jeff. And Uncle Jeff, so my wife and I at the time, we were pastoring a church in Hawaii, Kealoha, which is the east side of the island. And Uncle Jeff, he became one of our residents for, so we had a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center on the property. And it's funny because our campus director, Royce, he was from the mainland, so he was very aggressive in getting clients, or as we call them, clients or residents, and I think at the time we had, I can't remember how many beds. Let's just say we had 16 beds. So whenever we refer to beds in a drug or alcohol rehab, we literally mean beds. So the more beds you fill, the more healthy your center is. Okay, so I'm painting that picture. So Uncle Jeff was one of those guys that he didn't quite fit the bill in terms of he didn't have an issue with drugs or alcohol, although he did use drugs and alcohol in his past. But anyways, we admitted him into the center, and when I first met him, he arrived on campus, and part of my job was doing what we call the intake. We do the interview, we do blood, not blood tests, but we do urinalysis. We call it UAs. We would run an extensive, we call it 18 panel, which means there's 18 little tabs on this on this little P cup, right? So anyways, we do all that, do the intake, and I noticed that Uncle Jeff had a hard time actually physically coming into our center. It's like he didn't want to come in. And as I'm rewinding in my mind that moment, I remember now I'm looking at him like, I think he was debating if he's going to come in or not. And I think later we talked about it. And he was standing on a street corner, looking back and forth, and he was telling me that this is my home. This is where and he started to share some stories about how Kealoha used to be back in the 80s, back in the late 70s, and how rough it was. And so I didn't know the full scope of what, this man or who he was at this point. I just knew he looked, I mean, if you look at the pictures I posted, like, he's a nice guy. He's a big Hawaiian looking, like, teddy bear guy. But when I found out, as I was doing the intake and doing the interview, I found out, and see, Royce, our director, didn't tell me all the details. That's kind of how he was. He was, hey, come, can you check this guy in? So as I'm sitting down doing an interview with him, and I ask him, okay, so we'll go through, we have a list of questions, when's the last time you used drugs? And when's the last time you got high? When's the last time you drank alcohol? Do you have this or that? And when we got to the incarceration question, he said, yeah, I've been locked up for 43 years. And I really was kind of thrown off a little bit, because I've never had someone that was incarcerated for that long. I've never, like 10 years, 5 years, small stints here and there, but never for 43 years. And I was like, wow. I mean, I didn't say wow, but in my mind, I was like, wow, this guy is, and he was kind of older. So it kind of was different for me. And so when I asked him, so why were you locked up? And he gave me this really hard, one of the hardest looks I've ever gotten from someone. And he had this face where it was just like, I know I feel like I'm dramatizing it, but I'm trying to explain how I felt. Like, he had this look Like, it was just like this really hardened look. His eyes were tilted. And he looked at me. He says, I was locked up for murder. And there was a part of me in that split second, like, I'm thinking, is this guy joking? Because, you know, for me, like, our rehab center was literally in a residential neighborhood. Okay. And in this neighborhood, the average price of a home at that time, let's just say it was 1.1 million. It might have been higher. Okay, so and we have this community, this family community, and we're bringing in someone who's a convicted felon, but not just a convicted felon, but he was convicted of murder. And he, of course, you know, he did his time. He got out. That was the first time I ever did an intake on someone who was convicted of murder. And I didn't know what to say or what to feel. I kept going through the questions, and of course we admitted him, and I'm like, okay, this guy, there's something special about this guy because he's here. And I said, God, I know that you've got him here for a reason. I'm not sure what that is yet, but and so we were, you know, Royce, our campus director, Royce has a big heart, and so we would bring in so many different types of people, but by far, Jeff was probably the hardest guy. Like, and he was old. I think at the time he was already 70, and so he's probably the oldest guy we ever took in. And I just remember, man, there's something special. And so I ended up meeting with his family eventually, because part of our program is to make sure that there's not just family support and community support, but that we work together with the families to make sure that there's a good success rate. Because the truth is, in most rehabs, the graduation rates are typically pretty low. The success rates are a little bit different. I think I like to measure those differently, because I'm going to share the success rate versus the graduation rate, because Uncle Jeff didn't graduate. He didn't graduate the program, but he was I would say he was a success story. So that's the picture of how I met him. Now let's go into a little bit of Google for those of you that you might Google him, and I'll read some things that this is all public information. It's all so. Going back to the title, The Heart of a Hitman, Uncle Jeff was a hired gun, basically. And so to paint the picture, in I want to say in the late 70s, there was a time in Hawaii's history in the area of employment, in unions, and you name it, multiple unions. So there was a major merger with the Teamsters. And there was one in Alaska, and with Hawaii, I think there was like combined, there was almost 30,000 members of this union merger. And part of that merger included city and county workers. There was what they call the Local 959, Local 996. These are all unions that were mergers. And in the middle of these political movements of unions, we're talking about $100 million. Back then, back in the 70s, $100 million. I'm not going to ask Google for the inflation rates, but $100 million back in the 70s is a lot of money, right? So when you've got a lot of money, especially with unions back in the 70s and 80s, you know there's going to be some shady characters involved in that kind of money. And they would control everything. Right. And so a lot of people don't know this about Hawaii. When you look at the old Hawaii 5-0 or the Magnum PI, you kind of get a glimpse into what I'm talking about. And so these unions end up getting into politics. They get into these fights in court, outside of court. You know, all the stories are true. When you hear about guys with baseball bats hitting guys on the kneecaps, that stuff's real. That's real stories. For those of you that know my wife and what she shared a couple of weeks ago in our podcast together, she shared stories on her dad, where her dad was kind of like a bill collector for some people. And that was just because her dad, my father-in-law, he grew up in that same era. And my wife's father ran around with people like Jeffrey Kealoha, who we're talking about today. So all those fights and in court, outside of court, threatening people, those were real because there was so much money involved. And there's this one character in this story we're going to talk about. His name is Josiah Lee. And so Josiah Lee was a regional vice president of this union. I think it's called the Inland Boatmen's Union. And so there was what they had believed syndicate connections. And so I'm not going to go into too much detail on that, but I mentioned the names that are vital. And Josiah Lee had, what I'm guessing is that he had a lot of power and authority when it came to these unions. Now, there's another character in this story, Henry Huihui, where he was an organizer for the Trades Council. And so there was a whole array of things that he was surrounded by, everything from, you name it, murder, kidnapping, all kinds of things in that realm. Well, Uncle Jeff, he was a former union member, and he actually he was the guy that was the hired gun at the time. I believe Uncle Jeff was 25 years old, and he ended up murdering Mr. Josiah Lee, and it was, I think, outside of his office. And this is all in the 70s, right? So that's the story of that, where what we know or what we believe is that Mr. Henry Huihui, through the friendship of Uncle Jeff, was basically a hired gun to go take this guy out. And if you look at court documents, you look at all this story, there's so many layers of this story. There's so many different, you can look it up, PDF files, there's court documents, and how they're trying to paint this picture of this search was legal, this traffic stop was legal, illegal, and Uncle Jeff's name is in all of those documents. So the story was, he approaches him in the hallway, and I guess they kind of know each other, and I'm not going to go into details, but basically he put out his revolver and shot him, killed him in the hallway. Of course, there's screaming and shouting. Josiah's wife ended up, screaming and calling for help, and there were cops outside. When they approached her, she yelled and identified. And these are all court documents. This is not what Uncle Jeff didn't tell me this story, and I'll share with you what he told me. And so Josiah's wife had said it was Jeffrey Kealoha. He's the one that shot my husband. So of course now there's this crazy search going on for this guy, for Uncle Jeff. Okay, and you can look it up yourself, but I'm gonna go fast forward into where it led to the trial. Of course, they arrest him, they find him, and there was a lot more layers to the story. And if you remember the beginning of this podcast, I said that Uncle Jeff said that he was never known as a rat. And that's true. And I'm going to share a couple more stories. And let me just emphasize, family, that what I'm about to share with you are my personal accounts with personal relationship. And for anybody that wants to know, the layers and the truth, I would encourage you to look it up after we're done today. And like I said, we're not here to glorify the gangster life or the syndicate or the connections. But after Uncle Jeff, he was convicted for murder. They basically sentenced him. I don't know how many years. I just know he was in there for 43 years. And at age of 70, they finally granted him, release. And there was a process to that. And now what Uncle Jeff shared with me was that he said that there was a lot more layers to the story than what you'll find. And he never shared with me the details because, like he said, I'm not a rat. So that alludes to the fact that there are more people involved. And excuse me, I'm a little bit gassy tonight. But he gave to me some evidence, like just through our sharing of our hearts and stories, that not only were there more people involved, but there were more things involved than what the court documents will say. And I when I go through the court documents online, and I'm like, it's almost like they wanted more information from him, but they couldn't get it. You know? So what did they do? They sentenced him for 43 years. And I think what they really wanted, they wanted the big fish, right? It's like any typical Hollywood crime story. They want the big fish. They don't just want the hitman. They want the guy that maybe organized it all. Maybe the guy that's, because like I said, we're talking about $100 million in these union mergers. There's a lot of power, money. That's generational wealth, right? There's a lot of generational money in there. And so when I hear this story from Uncle Jeff and he says, I'm not a rat. Now here's the interesting part of the story. For anybody that has anybody, or maybe you've been incarcerated and maybe you've done some time, you may know that the prison industry, it's big business. We tend to think, oh, they get locked up and, you know, they sometimes they have the worst conditions, sometimes they have good conditions. I know for a fact, a very dear friend of ours spent some time in federal prison in Honolulu, and I'm not downplaying it at all because it's still incarceration. But a very good friend of ours and his wife were incarcerated. It was a white collar crime. It was a part of a bigger sting. But I remember he said that the federal prison in Honolulu is like a country club. Literally, like vending machines, technology, cell phones. Now, there are some tough people in this prison in Hawaii, the federal, and the reason why it's tough is a lot of the inmates in this federal lockup are from out of state, and there's a few that are from New York. And the thought process is part of it, and I'll get into the money in a second, is that if they can get these guys away from their time zones, it's harder for them to do business, right? Because some of these guys are legitimate gangster type people that are still doing business while they're in jail. So they figure if they ship them far away as possible, it makes it a little bit more difficult for them to conclude or to do business. So that's an example of a country club. Now, here's the other part of the story with Uncle Jeff, is that what I found out was in the area of big business, for those that don't know, a lot of our prison industry is privatized. Or even if it's not privatized, there's a lot of money going around. So if Hawaii can't house inmates, or quote unquote can't house inmates, okay, so they'll ship them out. And so there are these institutions that will pay money, and so there's just financial transaction per inmate. And when you talk about somebody like Uncle Jeff, who's been sentenced for 40 plus years of his life, now you can see where I'm headed with this, where I'm going with this. It wasn't just a prison sentence; it was also a financial transaction. Now, I'm not saying that, I'm not making any less of his sentencing, but it shows that the prison industry definitely it's a lot more than what we know. Now, unless you've been incarcerated yourself or you have family members, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. And so I will say that in that respect of Uncle Jeff, and I'm gonna explain some stories about him and that he shared. Because here's the thing. Number one, he didn't rat on anybody. He didn't rat on anybody that was involved in any of his business dealings. So because of that, he gets the full sentence, or as much as possible, I guess, whatever the law allowed back then. Now, I don't know how many states he was moved to, but I think at least 12 to 15. So Texas, Tennessee, California, you name it, Arizona. A lot of Hawaii inmates go to, I think, Arizona. There's a very healthy relationship between Hawaii and Arizona when it comes to inmates. I don't know why Arizona, They must like each other. The financial transactions must be smooth. And so with Uncle Jeff moving from institution to institution, always maximum. I'm pretty sure he did max. Anybody that does that kind of a crime, and he was, there were other crimes too that were attached to it, other, things in his sentence. So from institution to institution to another institution, one of the things that I found very unique about this story with Uncle Jeff was that, don't quote me on this, I'm not going to share any personal details, but I'll just say this. His family was taken care of while he was locked up. And whether you want to call it mob lifestyle, gangster lifestyle, syndicate, whatever title you want to use, because of the way Uncle Jeff played things out when he got sentenced, his family was taken care of. Now, you can talk to his wife, and she may have a different story and how that interprets. But my last conversation with her, and we're so grateful that we can call her part of our family. When at my last conversation, I told her we're praying for you, and we know that there's a lot of remnants to this story because he's got kids and grandkids, but they were taken care of, and so everywhere he went, his wife had access to him. So the unique thing about him being locked up for so long, when I say unique, I'm not trying to glorify it, but there's a term, I think they call it conjugal visits. So you see where I'm headed with this. Even though he was locked up for so long, he was able to have children, right? And so to paint that picture, that was the type of guy that he was. That he didn't rat on anybody. He didn't name names, and he took it like a champ. And he gave up 43 years of his life. And I'll say that I don't know how many people would do that today. And when you look at the documents, if you look it up, and you're like, wow, that was some hard times back then, and it's like, I don't know in today's climate how that would play out. And so I think that's enough backstory to his history. And I'll just leave it at that, where for them to move him from institution to institution, it was a financial transaction. So the state of Hawaii got their money. Right, they got their money. Now, I don't know if he was rehabilitated. I'm not sure what the mission statement of the prison systems are, but a lot of them, when they come out, they're not equipped for life. And I know that for a fact because, like I said in the beginning, Uncle Jeff was the first guy that I met that did 40 plus years of his life. My experience was with guys that did 10 years, 5 years, at the most 12 years. And even they struggled as they got out to start a new life. Whether it was an issue with drugs or taking shortcuts and going back to the old lifestyle. Can you imagine Uncle Jeff, who came out 43 years later, and he's like, what is all this technology? What is this? Like, how come the streets look different? And so when I met him, going back to our meeting, here's another thing here's another aspect of this story that really got my attention. So if anybody has experience in alcohol or drug rehab centers, like residential facilities, typically they don't have a lot of freedom. Okay, so for the first month, basically no contact with outside. Very, very limited. You can't use a phone. You can't go out on field trips. You're at the center. And that's kind of typical of most centers. Part of that is to protect the resident. Part of that is to protect the other residents. and to make sure that they have a legitimate cut off from their old lifestyle. Well, let me tell you, Uncle Jeff, from day one, he had connections. He's the first resident that we had that had his own limo driver. And you guys think I'm exaggerating, but I'm embellishing the story a little bit in the area of limo driver. But he had a Lincoln Town car pick him up once a week to go run errands. Okay, a Lincoln Town car, and that was one of his connections for years, and that was his personal driver. He had a personal driver come pick him up once a week to go run errands, and I say run errands, and I'm not embellishing that one bit. Because even though Uncle Jeff had to go to appointments, he would still go run errands. So, this is from day one, family. And he had people take care of him. And here's another part of his story. He always had cash. Like, there's rolls of cash. And I never, in hindsight, I'm like, I probably should have probed more into that. But I trusted him because he was a kind gentleman, and he did have a big heart, and he didn't have a problem with drugs or alcohol, but he still broke the rules, So, but he always had cash. He always had the best snacks, and so when he would go out on these errands, he would come back with all kinds of goodies. One of his things was he had these certain candies that he would like to get. And part of my job was counseling the residents, right? And so I don't remember really counseling him because he would always end up talking story to me and telling me stories of his past and things that, And so when I go back in my mind and I think about Uncle Jeff and how special he was. Even though he did 43 years in lockup for being convicted of murder, when he came out and he was like telling me about the stories of the old lifestyle and how gangster this town used to be, how gangster Honolulu used to be, and now everything's changed. Everybody's changed, but yet he still had connections to some of the old people. He would call, "Hey, that's my peeps. Greg, that's my peeps. That's my peeps." He always said, "That's my peeps." And one of the memories I'm going to share with this, we're gonna land the plane pretty quick on this one because this is just more of a tribute. So, my wife and I were our church. We were pastoring right there on the campus, right? So I think it was on Thursday nights. My wife and one of our leaders, Leah, they would do these prayer nights where they would just pray, and it would be organic, like in person, and we also did online. But Uncle Jeff would always come over, and he would just come in and kind of sneak in. And he's actually not supposed to be there because the way the campuses are, you can't just leave your campus without letting somebody know. He would just kind of quietly sneak in. And so while my wife and one of our prayer leaders that they were praying, he would just come in and hang out. And I wasn't there sometimes because I would be working either counseling or... And Uncle Jeff, he would just kind of sneak in and just hang out. And he would watch and he would listen. So while my wife and Leah pray, and then when he got a chance to talk, the prayer shifted from prayer to talk story. But that was Uncle Jeff. Even though he wasn't a hitman anymore, he still pulled his weight around. He kind of pushed his weight around because that was his nature. And it wasn't he was trying to be controlling or mean. That was just in his nature. To have that control and he was very respectful. So I don't want to paint a picture that he was a disrespectful person, but he was very, very much so in control. And so from that moment when we were spending time with Uncle Jeff and he was sharing all these stories on, his old lifestyle and all these people. And it's funny because some of the connections that he was talking about, we understood that because because of the names that he dropped. Hawaii is a small place, right? It's an island. It's a series of islands. So you throw one name around, everybody at some point is either going to know them personally, or a friend of a friend, or family of a family. And there was a lot of connection there. And so from there, we had this fundraiser. I'm going to talk about the fundraiser, and we're going to come back to Uncle Jeff. And then we're going to land a plane on this, because I really want to just give a tribute to him and how good of a man he was. But we did a fundraiser. In Hawaii, we call it aloha, which is like a taro leaf, like 5 or 6 leaves, all stacked together. We put pork, salt, pork fat. Sometimes you put a little bit of butterfish, or I think it's like salted. It's like salted codfish, basically. A little piece. Sometimes people put chicken. Some people put some guys put beef, but that's extremely rare. And then they wrap it up. And we were making it for a fundraiser. Uncle Jeff was like, "What you guys doing?" So if you don't know, Uncle Jeff's name is Kealoha. He's legit Hawaiian. And if you look at the pictures of him, that's on Hawaiian. Okay, so he's looking at us making this lau. And he's like, "You know what, Greg? That's not how you make them." He's probably talking to my wife. And so he shows my wife and Leia how to make the lau and how he makes them. Okay, so most indigenous cultures of First Nations people, when they cook food, they usually cook for a community. So they make a lot, right? So in Hawaii, a lot of our culture historically, so they'll dig a hole in the ground, and then they'll make holes and rocks, and so they basically throw all this food in the middle, and they'll cover it up, and they'll let it slow cook underground for about, let's just say, 10 to 12 hours. In South America, they have the same thing. So in Hawaii, they call it imu. I think in South America, they call it emu or emu or whatever. It's EMU. And then in Samoa, they call it umu, UMU. Okay, so it's an underground oven, basically. So anyways, back then, they would wrap it in like, in Hawaii, we call it tea leaf. So tea leaf is not tea like you drink tea, but it's like a long green leaf that you may have seen in some movies where they use it as fans. Okay, so they would wrap this lau with the taro leaf, and they cover the outside with this tea leaf, and they tie it off. Okay, and they tie it off in a special way, and then you make, whatever, 100 of them, 200. At that time, we made 1,400. I'm looking at my wife right now, but we made 1,400 laus because it was for a fundraiser. And so the new generation of people today, whether it's like, for example, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Hawaiians, Samoans, a lot of the foods like that now, they use tinfoil, because tinfoil is easier. Now, there's still some Mexican cultures where they use like the corn husk, to wrap certain foods. So it just depends. But in general, a lot of Hawaiians today will use tinfoil because it's easier, it's cheaper, faster. Not Uncle Jeff. Uncle Jeff is, no, we're going to use tea leaf. And that took us forever, and it's a lot of work. But Uncle Jeff was like, no, this is how we're going to do it. And here's the crazy part. He asked us, how much you need? How much you need, Greg? I said, I don't know. He said, no. You need to tell me how much you need. And this is Uncle Jeff now. This is a guy that's been locked up for 43 years now. He goes, you just tell me how much money you need. No worry, Greg, I get them. My peeps can come true. That's what he was saying. My peeps can come true. Family, we told him the dollar amount, and we're talking about in the thousands, okay? He says, don't worry. And I never forget, he came by one day. He came by with an envelope. Bloop. I'm not going to say the dollar amount, but let's just say it was stacks. Okay? It was stacks of cash. And that financed our fundraiser in the beginning. So, of course, we get our money back, right, when we sell, and then we pay him back. he financed our fundraiser of 1,400 lao lao. So let me put it into perspective. When we sell the lao laos, I think we sold 3 for 10, 5 for 20. Okay. So that fundraiser, you can do the math. We're talking about in the thousands. Okay. And this is just a fundraiser for our kids. Yeah. For our youth in our church. But that was Uncle Jeff. When you needed money, he said, how much you need? Great. Just tell me. Now, keep in mind now, he's a resident of a drug and alcohol rehab center. So he's pulling up with cash, right? If you are a struggling drug addict and you see somebody with wads of cash, you'd be like, oh my God. Right? But that was the kind of guy he was. And he was still connected. And I thank God every day that he was still connected, but he was in a good place. He understood that God gave him a second chance at life, even at 70. And to talk about the heart of Uncle Jeff, there are so many little stories in between, and I'll share one more. And one of them was he loved to cook. Oh my gosh, he loved to cook. And he made this one dish. He just got this big piece of I forgot what he called it. I want to say it wasn't even a good cut. It was a tough cut of meat. But he would say, Greg, know where I get you hungry. And he was, here's another thing about Uncle Jeff. When we was hungry, he always had food. And he would always figure out a way to, and so you name it, raw fish, steak, he would make some food. So the one time he made this steak for me, it was a really poor cut. But he would cut them up in such a way that when you bit into it, it was actually pretty good. Real simple. And he had this way of he would fry it up, and then he would boil it, and he would drain the water, and then he would cook it again. It was such a strange way. And I guess that's the old way where they would boil the meat down and then cook it again. But I remember those stories of Uncle Jeff and how he was so giving. And when I look at his story, I'm like, I wasn't so concerned about his dark past, or it actually wasn't until later when we moved away where I actually started to look more into his story and just how special of a man he was. And I know that there's some dark layers to his lifestyle, even to the day of his passing. There are still some dark layers, but I know that God preserved him. I know that God gave him a second breath, if you will. And the short time that we got to know him, spend time with him, and even meeting his grandkids, because of his lifestyle and being locked away for so long and not really getting a chance to raise his kids. And there was some fallout to that, and I'll leave it at that. And his wife is still walking those things out today because of his life choices. And the thing is, he was 25 years old when he was convicted of murder. He was 25 years old, and when he came out, it was in his 70s, or pretty close to 70. I'm trying to do the math here. And so when I look at from where his story began to where we met him, and knowing all of the people that he knew, all of his syndicate connections, gangster connections, and the rough lifestyle, and the people he was connected to, the man that we knew, my wife and I met, the man that invested time in us. And I think what he saw in us, but we never care. We never care where he came from, what his life story was. We just knew that we loved him. And we loved the fact that every time we hung out with him, he always brought life. He always brought life to the situation. Always brought life to our conversation. He always made us laugh. And if I ever... I'll share this last story, and I'll close with this. I'm trying to figure out how much of this story I can share, because there's some personal things in here that are still unresolved. Well, not for me. But I'll say this. There was a time where there was some falling out on the business side of things for me and my wife in the area of the ministry, not the church or anything like that, and not really a falling out, but there's how should I put this? I'm trying to word this in the best way possible, because I'm not one of those people that likes to throw people under the bus, because I don't hold grudges or anything like that. But let me just put it this way. There came a time where we had to make a decision ministry-wise, because God was calling us in a different path. And when Uncle Jeff saw the back end of the ministry, see, a lot of people, when it comes to like churches and ministries and nonprofits that are operated as a Christian base, everybody's familiar with the front end of it, right? And then when they see the back end of it, because there is a business to it, there has to be some form of business. And I'm not talking about like to make money or profit. I'm talking about the actual administrative side of it. A lot of people struggle with that, because sometimes, and I'll just speak for in general, as Christians, as churches, as nonprofits who operate as a Christian nonprofit, a lot of times they neglect the administrative side of the ministry to where it can get messy, it can get ugly. And so Uncle Jeff, when he saw the back end of the ministry, he was not happy. He was literally, I'll just say, some of the talk he was talking some crazy talk. He's like, let me call my peeps. You know, I can call my peeps, bro. You tell me what you need. He would always say, you tell me what you need. And I was like, and I said, Uncle Jeff, this is how things work sometimes. And we got to work through those things. And I never forget, he would always offer, let me call my peeps. Anything you need, you let me know. And I'm like, no, we're good, Uncle Jeff. He goes, you sure, Greg? You sure? I get you. My peeps, bro. He always said my peeps. my peeps will come true. But that was Uncle Jeff. And I wish I had more time with him. I wish I could have invested more time with him and his wife. I never met his kids. I think I met one of his children, but that was just a real brief moment. And I did meet his grandkids, beautiful grandchildren. And I just wish I had more time with him. And I wish I could not just do a sit down like this with him, but to where you guys could meet him and see him and hear him speak and hear him share stories on what it was like living in Hawaii back in the 60s and 70s. And it's a tragic story when you look at how young he was when he was already living a gangster lifestyle. And I think I remember him telling me a story that he said, we were just a bunch of little boys back then playing with guns. And I find it strange that he would say it like that. And I think he came to terms with himself in that respect when he says, we were just a bunch of kids, we was trying to live a life and play with guns, is what he said. And it's tragic when I think about how young he was and how he gave up 43 years of his life. And the unfortunate thing is that he took the life of Josiah Lee. And I don't know the whole story of that. But I know that there are some generational hardships with that, right? With the children and the grandchildren. And they suffer from that. But the man that we knew, the man that we met, who got the second chance at life outside of jail, outside of prison, was a gentleman. He was kind. He could be hard at times, but he was loving. And I just wish we had more time with him. And I will say that as time goes on, as I get more details on his story, I'll share a little bit more. I'll probably share it on social media just to, as a tribute to honor him. And for those of you that follow me on Twitter, because I don't post some of these things on anything but Twitter, I did a write up on him, a short little write up. Posted a couple of his pictures. But if you want to get to know him a little bit, follow me on Twitter, on X. If you want to do the Google search, you can look him up. I'll make sure I put him in my title. But I'm blessed that I got a chance to know him. My wife got to know him. My kids got to know him. And I got to share this last story. And then we'll close it. There's so many stories. I'm trying to limit the stories so I can save some for later. So my wife and I used to breed. We were breeding bulldogs, and we didn't know at the time how the culture of Hawaii was. I'm not sure how the mainland how it is, but we were breeding our bulldog, who technically was not our bulldog on paper. And let me explain that. So in Hawaii, if you have a pure breed bulldog, so let me put into perspective how much bulldogs are. So in Hawaii, if you want to buy a purebred bulldog, blue ribbon means they get, all these things at shows. They can go for anywhere from 8 to 15,000. Okay, for a puppy. So here we are thinking, wow, we're gonna make a lot of money. So we're gonna make a lot of money. And so when we breed our dog, we get a call. I don't know the timeline. So let me just fast forward. We get a call and say, hey, that's my dog. And basically we didn't know. We said, no, that's not your dog. And we get into this whole heated discussion. Well, we didn't have the papers for the dog. This person had the papers for the dog. And so, long story short, we came to a compromise that through the breeding, we would come to an agreement with the financial terms. Now, mind you, we had 10 puppies. So do the math. Okay, so do the math. And we were still wet behind the ears. We didn't understand the business side of how it worked. So this person did, because that was quote unquote her dog. Well, she came on property one time, and my wife, and I wasn't there, but I remember my wife was telling me, if you could see Uncle Jeff's face when this person arrived on the property, the look that he gave this person was like, so Uncle Jeff, not only was he a gentle, kind, and loving man with a big heart, he was also a bodyguard for us too, and fortunately, we never had to call on him to actually follow through on his bodyguard action, but my wife said, if you could see Uncle Jeff's face when this person arrived, it's almost like you could see the things that he would do or wanted to do. And I'm glad that he didn't have to do anything, because that's not what we would never ask him to do anything anyway. But that's the kind of guy he was. Huge heart, loving, second chance at life, even though he had done some very evil things and when he was young, and even going through the hardship of being locked up for so long, the way that they treated him in the prison system, just because of what he did. And I get it, he paid, he did the time, paid his dues. But the man that we met, Uncle Jeff, Jeffrey Kane Kealoha. So Kealoha, for those that were here from the beginning, listen in the beginning, Kealoha means beloved in Hawaiian. My mom's middle name is Kealoha. And so that's where the connection, the connection comes in the area of the Kealoha. And I don't know, I just felt, not in a weird way, but I was kind of like, okay, this is cool. This guy's name is Kealoha. If you follow the last name Kealoha in Hawaii, there's not a lot of good things with that last name in Hawaii history, especially in the area of corruption. But so that's Uncle Jeff, big heart, tough guy, a former hitman, hired gun, whatever you want to call it. Did his time, paid his dues. Father, grandfather, but he was a great friend. And like I said earlier, I just wish I had more time with him. But I want to honor him by doing this, because there's not a lot of things that are out there on social media, or any media for that matter, that share stories about him. And I have actually quite a bit more stories to share, but I'm not going to do it on this podcast. But I want to thank you for listening. And I'm glad I was able to do this late at night, because it's nice and quiet. I don't have to worry about the dogs. And for those of you that are invested in this podcast, I want to thank you for doing that. And do me a favor, if you can't support us through our merchandise or through our affiliates, or just give us a like, give us a good review on our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Give me a follow on socials if that's what you want. But thank you for your time. I really appreciate you guys listening. And so that's all I got for tonight, for today, whatever time it is in your world, in your part of the planet. If you didn't catch it already, my name is Butter Greg, aka The Real Gilo. Links are in my bio. Thank you so much for listening, family. And as I always say, before I end it though, remember the name Jeffrey Kane Kealoha. Jeffrey, aka Biggie Kealoha. Our dear friend who had a big heart, Uncle Jeff. Thank you for listening, family. Love you guys. God bless you guys. Until next time, I want to say it again. Love you guys. God bless you guys. Huiho, aloha, and mahalo. Yes, sir. Chihu.
Every day like this, it's a brand new day.